A community events survey was released and I decided to make this video to share some of my thoughts. I am a Cubing Contest admin, Cubing Contest being the website that hosts results for unofficial events held at WCA competitions and other unofficial contests. I hold the FMC World Record Single and the FTO, Face Turning Octahedron, XWR Single and Average. So I'm definitely biased towards FTO, just keep that in mind when watching this video. But in general, I enjoy doing many different unofficial events, and that's one of the main reasons why I enjoy FTO so much. Ideally, I feel like the WCA should hold as varied an event list as possible, representing as many different types of puzzles and different types of skills that require to solve those puzzles as possible. Next, I'm going to try and discuss what makes an event unique from the other ones in the WCA. I'm going to primarily focus on the skills that are required to be competitive at a top level in the event and sort of what each event contributes to the WCA. So first, we can take 3x3 as sort of a baseline. It's the original twisty puzzle, the original Rubik's Cube. It's the main event at most competitions and I would say the WCA as a whole. So at a top level, they are both intuitive steps and like some block building maybe, and they're also algorithmic steps. Certain methods can trade off the intuitive steps for algorithmic ones and vice versa. You can also imagine 3x3 finger tricks as sort of a standard baseline, as cubic face turning puzzles have higher TPS compared to any other kind of puzzle. At a top level, you can plan a decent amount into inspection, but at least as of now, you can't plan the entire solve, so there are still some mid-solve recognition and look ahead that is still required. Next up, 2x2, which is of course the smaller variation of a 3x3. This at a top level requires one looking, and this is a pretty unique skill that can be mastered. And of course, during the solve, you don't even have to look at the cube if you've one looked it properly. And so there's no sort of look ahead or mid-solve recognition that is required. Top level pyramids and cube also require this skill, but the solve itself for those is unique to a 2x2. Next up, I'll discuss 4x4 through 7x7. So at a top level, all solvers use some sort of reduction to a 3x3, and the higher the order, the more certain reduction skills are amplified. So for example, top 4x4 solve may have roughly 2/3 of the solve being the reduction step and 1/3 being 3x3, whereas a top 7x7 solve may have only 5 to 10% of the solve be 3x3 stage, while the other 90 to 95 is reduction. The proportion of centers and edges also changes between these puzzles, and they overall all have pretty similar skill sets, but the proportion of, what skills are amplified in each puzzle changes between them. Next, I'm going to discuss the blindfolded events. So these all introduce a timed memorization phase into the solve, which is completely unique to these events. Clock kind of has something like this, but it's during inspection, so it doesn't really count. And then the method required for the execution phase is unique to the blindfolded events and not really viable for high-level speed solving. The exact amount each skill affects the solve, again, varies by the event, where multi-blind amplifies long-term and accurate memorization, as well as accurate and consistent execution. And on the other end, 3-blind values extremely quick memorization and very fast execution. 4x4 and 5x5 blindfolded are somewhere in between and introduce different sort of piece types that require different algorithms compared to 3x3 blindfolded, and also require accuracy and turning, specific layers compared to 3x3, which of course only has 3 layers, whereas a 5x5 has 5 different layers. So there's some different skills that can be added in there. Next is one-handed, which introduces an entirely different way you have to turn the puzzle. The exact same solving methods can be used on 3x3 and one-handed, but one-handed values efficiency more than 3x3 as your turning speed is limited. This one difference makes Roux a far more popular method in one-handed at a top level compared to standard 3x3, which is interesting. The last variation event is FMC. Although still normal 3x3 is used, the only thing that matters is efficiency, other than, of course, being done in under an hour. The only thing that matters is the move count. This event introduces the ability to essentially backtrack your solution with no penalty and essentially eliminates any penalty for recognition speed completely, changing the methods and techniques used in this event compared to top-level normal 3x3 speed solving. The next sort of category of events is just different puzzles. So the first one I'll discuss is Megaminx. This is a dodecahedral version of the standard 3x3, and the solving method actually is pretty similar to a 3x3, but with a lot more focus on the intuitive block building steps rather than algorithmic steps. This dramatically amplifies, the amount that the block building skill matters compared to 3x3, which is pretty unique to Megaminx. The next event I'll discuss is Pyraminx, which, as mentioned earlier, requires one looking at high TPS with no active recognition while solving at a top level, but values more skill in the intuitive steps rather than 2x2 and skew, which require learning a lot of algorithms. Fewer algorithms are actually required on Pyraminx to find lower move count solutions. Next up is Skew, which again has some overlap with the skills required for Pyraminx and 2x2, but the solve itself is very different, and the algorithms used and sort of the intuitive steps and layer building is very different from 2x2 and Pyraminx, as well as the finger tricks required to turn this puzzle quickly. Next, Square One. So this is the only event in the WCA that features any kind of shape-shifting or bandaging. The finger tricks vary, a little bit from 3x3, but the uniqueness of this puzzle lies primarily within the solve, which, is very unique due to the fact that it can shape-shift and bandage. The last puzzle, that I haven't discussed yet in the WCA is Clock. This is probably the most unique event currently in the WCA, which is probably why it gets a lot of the hate from people who want it removed. But despite all the hate, I actually believe this is what makes Clock such a good event in the WCA. The unique turning and solving method amplifies skills not present in any other event, and it's the only event at a top level that requires sort of complex simultaneous moves that are not possible in other events. Additionally, it's the only puzzle that's non-commutative, as it is a orientation-only puzzle, and despite what people say, it is in fact a twisty puzzle. So now that I've given a high-level overview, and I want to emphasize high-level overview of what I feel makes each event unique in the WCA and what skills are required at a top level to be competitive, I'm going to discuss sort of how I think the events list could change to make it better. So overall, I feel like I want to see as many different skills and variations as possible featured in the WCA event list. Obviously, it's not possible to add every single possible conceivable event, but there are trade-offs that need to be made, of course, and figuring out which events are, more important than others and which events, would add the most to the WCA. So again, this is my opinion. So first, I'm going to start by going through the list of events in the survey released and discuss the new skills and variety added. I should mention that I have speed solved all of these to some degree and competed unofficially in all of these, but 4x4 one-handed, 8x8, although I have competed in 10x10, and mini Guildford, but I have competed in two-man mini Guildford. I would also like to mention that I believe there is a large bias in unofficial events overall towards the ones that are easy to learn from skills that people already have from events that are already in the WCA, and this sort of necessarily makes those events very similar to ones that are already in the WCA, and I feel like that's overall a downside to those events, but I just feel like I should have mentioned that. So the first one is 3x3 team blindfolded. This would introduce the first team event and communication and collaboration that is not currently present in the events list. Executing and solving methods would be very similar to 3x3, and it would actually be pretty challenging to regulate. Overall, I think this is actually a really good event, but a really good unofficial event. It's pretty easy to pick up, but it's kind of hard to regulate competitively. Um, so overall, I don't think it's a great idea to add to the WCA, but it's actually a really good event, um, counterintuitively. The next one is 4x4 one-handed. This essentially just combines the skills required in one-handed and 4x4. So it overall doesn't add that much new stuff. Of course, efficiency is a little bit more, you know, important in 4x4 one-handed, but I just don't feel like it adds enough things that are significant enough to warrant a whole new event for it. Next is 8x8. Again, it sort of amplifies the reduction skills that are required in 7x7, but it only amplifies them and not necessarily adding anything new. The next one is face turning octahedron. Of course, this is the event that I'm most biased towards because it's the event that I'm best at, but I feel like, I've gotten so good at it and I really enjoy it because I enjoy the event as an event. I didn't get into it because I was the best. I got into it because I enjoyed it and then I became the best. So I should mention that. But it would introduce a new puzzle and a new shape that is unique to all the other puzzles that are in the WCA. New finger tricks because of the new shape, and the solve is pretty unique as it requires sort of supercube types centers to be considered, whereas any other center building currently it doesn't require that. But the method is similar to reduction type methods used in big cubes, although the solve itself is different, if that makes sense. Next up is the heavy cube. I don't know why this was included. It's just the pyraminx, but no tips, and the edges don't have an orientation. It's a super simple event, so it's appealing to people who, you know, uh, are newer to speed solving, but I don't feel like that's a good reason to add it to a competitive speed cubing organization. The next one is Kilominx. So this is an order variation of the Megaminx. New last layer algorithms could be developed to combine, OLL and PLL, so like CLL for Kilominx. It's like 2x2, but more emphasis on the intuitive block building steps. Um, Overall, it's actually a pretty good event, but it's got a lot of, similarities to current events in the WCA. The next one is master pyraminx. This is just an order variation of the pyraminx. It introduces some sort of like pyraminx edge pairing type stuff and Jing's pyraminx centers, which aren't present on pyraminx. Um, Overall, it is similar to a pyraminx, and there are skills that carry over, but it is different enough that I could see it becoming an event. So overall, I'd say it would be a decent addition. The next event is Mini Guildford Relay. This sort of combines the skills required across a large variety of events, um, but sort of Megaminx Y4 and 5x5 skills vastly outweigh the other events, and inspection skills aren't really as useful. Um, it also, kind of the definition of it is it's all average of 5 events in the WCA. So if the WCA ever changes its event list, then sort of this event would change, which, I mean, I imagine that in practice that wouldn't happen, but in theory, that's what should happen. Um, the next one is mirror blocks. This introduces solving by shape rather than by color, which is completely unique to all other events currently in the WCA. And the finger tricks are also new and unique, but the solving itself is similar to 3x3. And then the last one is Ready Cube, which is sort of a quarter turning puzzle. So the finger tricks would be unique to any other puzzle in the WCA. But it is sort of similar to a pyraminx in a lot of ways in the solve, but it's longer and pretty much no algorithms are required. And then also the edges don't have an orientation. So those are my general thoughts on what the events add and don't add to the WCA. There's definitely a strong bias in this list towards events that people already know how to solve, which I feel like is a bad thing, as adding an event that most people already know how to do from their knowledge of current WCA events to the WCA doesn't really add anything new. Next, I'm going to discuss a few events not mentioned above that I feel like would add something unique to the WCA that's not currently present. Many of these aren't very popular, And I feel the primary reason is there's no really incentive to practice any of these, as the skills obviously don't really transfer to any WCA event. But I feel like that's a strength to all of these events in terms of their uniqueness and what they would add to the WCA. So the first one is mirror blocks blindfolded no inspection, basically just solving it based on the feel. It's would be the only event that solves based on like touch rather than by sight. Recognition and look ahead change, you know, pretty drastically compared to all other cited events. And it also introduces an event that people who are blind can compete against everybody else on a even playing field. People who are blind can already compete in normal 3x3 with a textured cube, but that's a significant disadvantage to sighted people. And, you know, a nice side effect of adding this event is, it would increase the number of people who could compete competitively at WCA competitions. The next event would be any kind of cuboid. This is a very broad category that could contain cuboids that both shapeshift and don't shapeshift, but in general, solving methods for cuboids are unique compared to n-by-n-by-n's, as the restrictions present eliminate many algorithms that can be used on normal n-by-n's from being possible to execute. The non-shapeshifting versions are more restrictive in what knowledge can be carried over from current events, so I feel like adding one of those would be better. Next, I would like to mention edge turning puzzles. Currently, there are no edge turning puzzles in the WCA, which I feel like is a pretty big gap in the event list. The solving methods and finger tricks of these puzzles are pretty unique, and thus would, I think, be worthwhile to add. The strongest candidate is, I think, the Curvicopter. This contains more piece types than like a helicopter cube or a clover cube, making the solve more interesting. But the one issue is the puzzle can jumble. This could be incorporated into the solve where, kind of like square one, you have to do cube shape and then during the solve deal with any parities, which could add another layer of complexity to the solve. But if that isn't present in the scramble or solve, it would be kind of hard to regulate because you could do puzzles, like you could do moves on the puzzle um, like extra moves on the puzzle with the jumbling moves, but I do feel like something like this should be added. Next, I would like to mention Corner Helicopter 2x2. This puzzle combines face turns, edge turns, and corner turns, which makes it a very unique puzzle in terms of like finger tricks and the solving not really being carried over from any current event. Lastly, I would like to touch on sliding puzzles like 15 puzzle. All of these puzzles are extremely unique compared to any current WCA event, but of course that's because they're not twisty puzzles. But I feel like it's close enough that adding them to the WCA could be justified. I can certainly see a case being made as they would add many unique skills to the WCA, but of course they aren't twisty puzzles, so it may not be appropriate, but I figure it's something that could be considered. Overall, looking at the WCA event list as it stands, the events that contain the most overlap in skill to other events I feel are 5x5 blindfolded. Many skills required are similar or identical to 4-blind or multi-blind, just to different degrees, and 7x7, which contains a lot of similar skill requirements to the other big cubes, just to a different degree, of course. Again, I know there are aspects of these events that make them unique, but I don't feel like these aspects are broad and significant enough to warrant an entirely new event. Um, if either of these events were removed, the skills required for top solvers could be transferred to similar events with minimal loss. Um, I mean, it certainly isn't a light decision to remove any current event, but I feel like keeping an event in the WCA that doesn't really add a whole lot, but prevents other events from entering the WCA that would add more is sort of a bad idea overall. As for events that I feel should be added, I feel like popularity isn't the best measure. Again, there's bias towards events where skills from current WC events carry over. Um, so there are many events that I think would be great additions, but don't have like any active community, as there's little to no incentive to practice, but would probably gain quite a community once the incentive of it being an official event is, there. I would love to see more events added to the WCA and new methods, techniques, and communities pop up around those events, and I'm hopeful that the WCA decides to do more with the events list moving forward, whether it be tiered events, regularly rotating new events in, or just straight up adding new events. Finally, if you're curious, I picked FTO and mirror blocks blindfolded, no inspection, in the survey for events that could possibly be added, and 5x5 blindfolded and 7x7 as events that could be removed. Thanks for listening to this Yap session, and leave any opinions you have in the comments and increase the engagement on this video. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video that I decide to post in like a year.